Wow, talk about a view, buddy. Check that out.
Hello there, this is Brian, and here is Maverick, and welcome to another one of our outdoor adventures.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our hike through Valley Forge National Park in the ice and the snow. It is March 13th, 2022, and we're about to get started. So before we do that, let's go ahead and click like and subscribe for future content. It really does help out the channel. So this is picking up from our first part of our hike, where we started on the north side of Valley Forge National Park, just outside the Washington Memorial Chapel. And we headed over to the Chapel Trail, which runs along the Schuylkill River. And then from there, we started heading west towards Washington's headquarters. And that's a bit of an off trail. It's not on the main part of the traditional walking areas. And we went through some pretty rigorous terrain on some parts of it through the ice and the snow. So after that, we broke off just, I believe, after River Road, which is to the right here, and we started heading across this field to the beginning of the encampment tour, which is a encampment area that they built as a model to a lot of the places that a lot of the soldiers would stay during Valley Forge. And for those looking to get their bearings straight, this is Route 23, otherwise known as Valley Forge Park Road, on this stretch. And we are going to cross right over here. Now, you see where that car is pulling out to the right there. If you follow that entrance, that'll actually take you right down to Washington's headquarters. And if this is your first time visiting that park, that's definitely one of the areas you want to go to. So, and it's interesting, as we came up to the entrance here for part of the encampment tour, this actually is closed off, and my guess is obviously because it was not fully cleared since we had this ice storm that came through. Well, ice and snow, I should say. But of course, that did not stop us. So now there's a couple interesting things to note about here. And as we go through, you're going to see a lot of cabins as we go across the ridge here. And when they built these, they scattered this throughout the entire area. And obviously because of this ridge, this gave this whole area a really great lookout from any type of invasion from the British. Now, of course, that actually never happened at Valley Forge. They stayed here relatively undisturbed. The biggest enemy for the soldiers and the army here as they stayed was actually the harsh winters of the time, which really took so many of the troops out during the Revolutionary War. And it was a really bitter winter stay. Interesting as well too is after the Revolutionary War, this whole area was, of course, before the Revolution, this was all farmer fields and traditional farms, and they built all these encampments and all the soldiers stayed here. And then following the war, they really didn't have as much of I guess, respect for the history, because in their time it was a present day history. Obviously, it wasn't history to them. So the local farmers started using a lot of the supplies, the lumber and whatnot left behind by the soldiers to build houses and to rebuild the area back into a working community. And it wasn't until years later that there was a movement to restore this area to what it once was. So if you see cabins as you go through here, these are obviously not the original cabins. In fact, I do not believe there are any of the original cabins in this area. And most of the houses, such as Washington's headquarters, was actually restored. Because most of these were, like I said, just turned back into working farms after the American Revolution. Hey. No. Now, we came up here using the west inner line, and then we turned off and right where the inner line spur kicks off. And now at this point, we're slowly making our way toward Redoubt 4. A redoubt, what that basically is it's like a temporary fortification. In this case, we have a cannon here with obviously some man-made cover that they built up, and this is a reenactment. And we can see this overlooks the entire field. And if we look down at the distance, we can see some of the cabins further down. And this provided both defense and line of sight to warn of any possible encroaching troops or any movements. And if you do have a chance to come to Valley Forge, I definitely recommend it. There's so much history, and there's a lot of living history here too, where they'll have reenactments throughout the weekends during the spring, summer, and they also provide a lot of on-trail information as far as what you're looking at. And it's really a really well-preserved historical park as well too. They put a lot of time and effort into it. And on top of that, it's actually a really enjoyable place just to even come for a picnic as well too. A lot of times during the summer, you'll see families here having large picnics and really just enjoying the park. You'll see runners and walkers and bicyclists taking advantage of the trails as well too. And there's a variety of paved trails as well as more off trails. I guess more moderate trails like we took earlier. So it really gives you quite a variety. Now at this point, we are heading toward one of the main encampments further up ahead. There's, I believe, 3 or 4 cabins here to the right, and if we were to turn to the right here, this takes us to a really built up encampment that kind of gives you an idea as far as what the lives of the soldiers went through when they were here. And of course, we're taking our time. It doesn't look like it probably from the video, but this is so slick coming down here, and it's kind of steep, and if we went too quick, we'd probably go flying down. So there weren't a lot of people out today, and again, that's one of the things I like about coming out in the winter is you tend to get these parks more to yourself during the winter months, and needless to say, during the summer, especially this being National Historic Park of such significance, it can really get busy, though never really too busy, I find. And surprisingly, it's actually really nice to come here too during holidays. I've taken hikes here in the morning through Memorial Day and Labor Day and 4th of July, and surprisingly, actually the park is not completely overrun. You might expect it to, but not really. Now at this point, we just crossed the North Interline Drive, and this trail up ahead here is the Joseph Plum Martin Loop Trail, which is a loop that goes from here and further west along a small creek. And as we can see, there's a small encampment. It's interesting, these are a combination of permanent and rebuilt cabins. And they are working cabins in that they do use these for reenactments. They store things inside. Sometimes they'll let you go inside and check it out more. Obviously this one is more for supplies. They have wood inside, so it's sealed off, but these are really neat to see, and it does really give you a good piece of history. When they do rebuild these, they try to be as historically accurate as possible. And what's interesting too is if you go throughout the entire encampment trail tour, they'll actually have ones that are partially built, so you can see what they look like as they're being built, which kind of gives you an insight. Okay, this is how they laid the foundation, this is how they built the walls, and these are the different styles. Sometimes they would have ones for officers, which were a little bit more equipped. Then they had ones that were more crowded for your common soldiers as well too. So really a combination of different types of cabins throughout here. And of course, here's another informational post letting us know where we are at. And this post here actually talks about some of the trials that these soldiers here faced. In total, I believe there were nearly 2,000 soldiers that died, and of course they weren't killed through fighting at Valley Forge. They were killed through disease. Two of the biggest diseases that went rampant throughout here during the winters were influenza and typhoid, which, you know, those are not great diseases to succumb to. And it's actually in a lot of ways a miracle that we actually made it through all of this. But, you know, through their determination, they kept their continental army together, and that ultimately is what led us holding out until the war came to an end. And that is an interesting thing about the American Revolution, is that while there were a few victories throughout the American Revolution, there was no decisive victory throughout. It was actually more wearing down the British occupation until it finally came to the point where it didn't make economical or political sense to continue. And of course that led later to the 1812 incursion as well too. And even to this day, you'll still hear some people in the British still refer, or in the UK refer to, and jokingly of course, to America as the colonies. But in a lot of ways, you know, it really wasn't, like I said, a decisive war. It was just a war of attrition until it just became no longer politically and financially viable for the British to continue. Now, coming up ahead here, we're heading toward the statue of General Friedrich von Steuben. Another interesting thing about the American Revolution is that the bulk of the forces on the American side were really just farmers and local citizens who really had no formal military training. Obviously, we did have our generals like General Washington, who was an experienced war general, and many others. But by and large, it was really just a group of common citizens trying to defend their land. And General Friedrich von Steuben came over and helped train our troops and get them into fighting shape to take on, at the time, one of the most powerful armies within the world, actually. And to the right here, we have General Varnum's quarters, which a lot of the quarters in the area were shared by the local farmers to help house our officers, to keep them going through this harsh winter. And then from there, we're just continuing along the hike, heading toward the chapel. On the right is the Waterman Monument, which was erected by the Daughters of the Revolution. And it's a 50-foot obelisk, and reminds me a lot of ways of the Washington Monument down in D.C. Well, I think that's going to finish up our part 2 of our hike through Valley Forge in the snow and the ice. It was a little bit of a shorter hike, and we hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please click like and subscribe for future content. It really does help us out. And we hope to see you in future videos. We try to upload as often as we can. And until then, get out there, make your own great outdoor adventures. And as always, take care.